When I hit the milestone of turning 30, I had finally managed to save up enough money to buy my first house. It wasn't anything remarkable, and to be honest, it was located in a neighborhood that wasn't exactly known for being the best. Still, I cherished the accomplishment. During the initial 2 weeks of moving in, I had the chance to meet all of my nearby neighbors, which was a novel experience for me. Having spent the majority of my life in different apartments, this level of neighborly interaction was new and surprising. Strangely, despite the neighborhood's reputation, they all seemed genuinely pleasant. A couple of them even extended dinner invitations, something I wasn't accustomed to. Of course, not all neighbors were as friendly. 2 houses down from mine lived a man who appeared to be around 50 years old. Soon after moving in, I noticed a peculiar pattern. Every other night, he'd knock on my front door at the most absurd hours requesting various items. For instance, the first time he did this, he asked if I had any spare bread I wasn't planning to eat. On another occasion, he needed help filling up a bucket with water because his supply had been cut off. These requests were random, but somewhat understandable given the circumstances. However, my patience reached its limit when he began asking for money. I believed that I had no obligation to fulfill this man's constant needs, especially considering I had only just met him. This was the first real time I started to notice how weird and creepy he is. He always had this loud breathing, like he was always out of breath, and after almost every sentence, he had this weirdly soft laugh. I don't get easily scared or creeped out, though it gave me chills, but I wanted to be a good neighbor to everyone, so I brushed it off. Anyway, as time went on, I gradually reduced my response to his knocks, hoping he'd take the hint. Oddly, my waning responses didn't deter him, and he continued showing up unannounced. And I started to notice that every time he knocked, the knocking had this same strange pattern. A few weeks later, another knock echoed through my door. My initial plan was to ignore it, as I had grown accustomed to doing by that point. But when I peered through the peephole, I saw something different about him. He seemed distressed. Against my better judgment, I decided to open the door. I inquired about his needs, fully expecting another bizarre request. However, what he said next was far from what I had anticipated. He asked if I could come over and show him how to use a new grill. This occurred around midnight, an extremely unusual time in my opinion to start grilling. Despite my reservations, I agreed to help. At that point in my life, I had a strong interest in cooking and thought that spending 10 minutes showing him how to use a grill wouldn't hurt. I told him I'd be over in a moment after I put on some shoes. He thanked me and began walking back to his house. A few minutes later, I made my way to his place. I entered through a gate and ventured into his backyard. The darkness made it hard to see, but one thing was evident. There was no grill in sight. Additionally, the man himself was nowhere to be found, even though his back door was wide open. I cautiously called out for him, and I received a muffled response from down a set of stairs to my left. I hesitated to go down there since there were no lights. In fact, the entire house remained in darkness. I yelled, requesting that he turn on a light so I could see, but there was silence for a few seconds. Eventually, he responded, "No, they're broken. I can't do that." At that moment, I knew something was amiss. I shouted something along the lines of, "I think I'm just going to leave, man." Almost instantly, audible footsteps started sprinting up the stairs. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I dashed back to my house, locking the door securely behind me. I peered through a set of curtains, scanning the surroundings, but there was no sign of the creepy man. I was petrified and considered calling the police, although I doubted I could prove anything about what had just transpired. For the next few days, I rarely ventured outside my house except for work. During that time, the man didn't appear, nor did he knock on my door late at night. Exactly 1 week after the eerie incident, I discussed my unsettling experience with a neighbor across the street. To my astonishment, they seemed bewildered. According to them, nobody had lived in the house I described for 2 years. It had been abandoned. Alarmed by this revelation, my neighbor contacted the police, but their search of the house and its surroundings yielded no results. A few weeks later, I decided to move out, leaving behind unanswered questions about the mysterious man and his intentions. I grew up in a not-so-big city, the largest in our state, but with a reputation for being rough, plagued by violence and crime. My home was at the edge of one of the city's tougher neighborhoods, in a trailer park right next to a local bar. This bar had a habit of getting shut down due to the noise and fights, but it always reopened with a new name. I was well aware of encountering sketchy and unsavory characters who seemed to appear out of nowhere. I had many neighbors I was warned to stay away from. It was just the way things were in that area, and I learned early on to be cautious, as people could be dangerous. Our trailer was located with a fence on one side, separating us from the bar and one other trailer. The other trailer was often empty or abandoned for a long time, but it had been home to a single mom and her 2 daughters. They were younger than me and had become my friends in the trailer park, especially after some unfair evictions by our eccentric landlady a few years ago. However, when the single mom and her kids were forced to leave, a creepy guy moved in. This change marked a turning point for me. I was in my first year of high school, around 13 or 14 years old, and I was beginning to realize that my family situation wasn't like what I saw on TV. It was a tough realization. The leaving of those girls who used to be my neighbors hit me hard. They were younger than me, but they were my only friends in the trailer park. Then, this man moved in. He was the only official resident, but during the first year or so, I often saw him in his yard with a group of guys. These guys were older than me but younger than my parents, likely in their late 20s to mid-30s. Sometimes, he and his friends would act rowdy when they were drunk, similar to the people at the bar on the other side. From the day he moved in, things got really weird. Unfortunately, the first oddity came from my stepfather, who was a truly awful person. He took pleasure in his racism and found it amusing. Within about 2 weeks, my stepfather had a 6-foot fence built between our trailers. He didn't want the new neighbor on the tiny strip of our property that had never been an issue before. He reveled in saying mean and hurtful things while we built the fence. Our new neighbor never complained about my stepfather's hate-filled words or the bizarre fence. Instead, he remained polite and would always wave when we came home. This made me feel embarrassed and like I owed this stranger for not responding to my stepfather's hate with more hate, but rather with kindness. Sadly, this reaction led to a dangerous situation. Even before the fence was finished, he and his friends would move closer to the front of his trailer whenever they saw me heading to check the mailbox by myself. Our mailbox was in the middle of the trailer park, and it was one of my chores to collect the mail. They would be inside, on the porch, or in the yard as I walked by, but every time I returned, they would gather in the front yard or driveway. He would greet me, and his friends would simply stare and then laugh. I was no stranger to feeling uneasy around strangers, and my family used to tease me for being overly cautious. However, my gut feelings had kept me safe on many occasions, so I had learned not to be ashamed of my caution. Despite this, I used to feel anxious when I saw these guys, and I thought they were laughing because I appeared scared. Over time, I grew more comfortable saying hello and waving to them. However, they continued to laugh, making me feel increasingly uneasy. I couldn't figure out why they were laughing. Were they laughing at me? My voice? My smile? The way I waved? Did I walk strangely? Most of the time, I just wished they would ignore me. Then one day, as I walked to the mailbox, the neighbor approached me and started walking alongside me. This became a daily routine. He would walk with me, asking questions about my day, school, and other typical topics. I didn't really enjoy it. My gut feeling was always on edge when he was near me. But back then, I didn't trust my own feelings. I had been told so many times that I was foolish for being scared. I kept scolding myself for being overly cautious around this seemingly nice man who had done nothing wrong. One thing to mention is that he never checked his mailbox when we went to get the mail together. If he had, it might have put my mind at ease, as it would have been normal for him to do so occasionally. The nature of our conversations during these mailbox trips began to change. A few days later, we were at the mailboxes again, and then he suddenly said, "Hey, don't tell your dad I said this, but you've got really great legs." I couldn't understand why, but at that moment, I wanted to cry and take a shower. My parents took a long time to realize that I might not be telling the truth when I claimed there was nothing in the mailbox on that day. My mom got angry, thinking I was just too lazy to walk to the mailbox. Finally, I told her the truth. I was scared of the neighbor, and then I shared with my mom what had happened at the mailbox, how he walked with me, and what he had said. My mom found it amusing and thought I was just being silly and shy, getting scared for no reason. She even brought it up during dinner and insisted I tell my stepfather. I hoped that maybe my stepfather would understand my feelings, given that the neighbor had explicitly told me not to tell him. But my stepfather remained quiet for a bit and then said, "Well, you do have nice legs. So what?" I felt embarrassed because it seemed like it was nothing and I needed to calm down. I eventually resumed checking the mail, but strangely the neighbor didn't accompany me anymore. I felt guilty, worrying that I had hurt his feelings. He also wasn't hanging out with his friends as much, and when he was home, he was often alone. Now fast forward a few months. I started seeing him randomly when I was home alone or checking the mail. He would wave and smile at me, making me feel even more ashamed for overreacting. However, one evening while I was taking a shower, my mother banged on the door and scolded me for steaming up the bathroom, claiming it could cause mold on the carpet. So as I had done many times before, I turned the crank to open a small window in the shower to let some steam out. This window was situated near the top, close to my forehead, but it was only about 4 to 5 inches tall and extended along the whole wall of the shower. I had been opening it while showering almost every day since I was 5 or 6. However, you couldn't really see the person in the shower, just their head, and even then, you'd have to be looking closely to notice it. I opened it a little, but then I heard a noise. I looked out and made eye contact with the neighbor right away. I quickly crouched down a bit to hide my head and tried to continue with my shower, but I felt exposed and extremely uncomfortable. A couple of minutes later, I decided to peek out the window again, just to make sure it was just a coincidence. However, he was still there, leaning on his porch railing, and he smiled slowly when our eyes met once more. I closed the window and hurried to finish my shower. I started taking very quick, cold showers to avoid opening the window. Not long after these uncomfortable shower incidents began, he started waiting outside for me when I got home from school. I used to walk home from the bus stop, and he always seemed to be in front of his trailer. Initially, it happened occasionally, but then it became a daily occurrence. He would step into my path and block me from reaching my front gate. He engaged in small talk, just like when we walked to the mailbox. I always replied politely, but also told him that I really needed to get inside and take care of my dogs, who had been alone all day while my parents were at work and I had been at school. Around that time, a girl about a year younger than me moved into the park at the far end. She was friendly, and we had a class together, but we hadn't really talked to each other. That changed one day when we got off the bus, and she asked if I wanted her to walk with me. I was surprised and confused by her offer, but I was also excited because I thought maybe he'd leave me alone if I wasn't by myself. So I agreed, and then she asked if I knew the strange guy who lived next door to me. I felt so relieved that someone else found him creepy, and I wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. She told me that about a week before, she had stopped at the landlord's trailer to ask a question. When she left the landlord's trailer, she saw me walking to my door, and he was just standing there watching. As soon as he noticed her, he started walking with her and tried talking to her, even telling her she had beautiful hair. She told him to go away and then ran all the way home. We came up with a plan where she would walk me to my driveway, and then I'd stay on my porch and watch her until she turned the corner where I couldn't see her anymore. He stopped waiting for us after school eventually. To this day, he hasn't walked with us again, and we both talked to each other about what the intention of the man was. I have a few ideas, but I don't want to make direct conclusions as I'm not sure about it. I am a woman, 23 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, and around 130 pounds. This story takes place during the summer before my sophomore year in college. I was on a mission to find an affordable place to live near campus, but all the good-looking apartments I found were way out of my budget. It soon became clear that I needed a roommate to share the rent burden. So I posted an ad on Craigslist explaining my situation and hoping for a response. Surprisingly, within an hour of posting the ad, I received a reply. It turned out to be an older lady in her 70s. I had initially expected to room with another student from my university, but I decided that as long as they were willing to split the rent, it didn't matter much. Plus, I hadn't received any other responses over the next week, so I took the opportunity that came my way. As the school semester began, Dorothy and I moved into our new place. She introduced herself as Dorothy, a short lady with white hair. She was a bit reserved, but seemed nice enough. I figured we'd coexist without much trouble, so I wasn't overly concerned about the upcoming months. However, over the next few weeks, I rarely saw her. We exchanged small talk in the kitchen from time to time, but she mostly kept to herself, spending all her time in her bedroom. Occasionally, late at night while I was watching TV in the living room, I would hear high-pitched giggling coming from her room. At first, I assumed she was on the phone or something, but I realized I never heard her talking, just giggling. I couldn't fathom what she was up to. And that giggle was creepy, resembling that of a small child, perhaps her daughter if she had one, in her room. Things took a bizarre turn as time passed. Dorothy started coming out of her room just to watch me. She would stand in the kitchen or the hallway, silently observing me while I watched TV or prepared dinner. It was unnerving, and I felt increasingly uncomfortable around her. One night, around 3 a.m., I was awakened by a faint knocking on my bedroom door. It wasn't the type of knocking meant to get my attention, but slow, soft, and barely audible. I called out Dorothy's name and the knocking ceased instantly. I was sure it was her because I heard the same giggling followed by her footsteps retreating to her room. This incident left me quite rattled. Since I didn't have a lock on my door, nothing prevented her from entering my room while I was asleep. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I had intended to confront her about the situation the following day, but she never left her room during the evening. Concerned for my safety, I moved my desk in front of my door as a makeshift barricade, given my lack of a proper lock. It wasn't a foolproof solution, but it was the best I could do. Unfortunately, that sense of security didn't last long. 3 hours later, I was jolted awake by the sound of my desk being pushed by my bedroom door, which someone was trying to open. It was Dorothy. I could see her eye peering through the crack of the slightly open door. Before I could react, she started screaming and banging on my door. My desk began to give way, so I got out of bed and helped the door close myself. The screaming and banging continued for what felt like an eternity. When it finally ceased, I immediately called the police. Upon their arrival, I cautiously opened my bedroom door, and what I saw left me horrified. Every single knife from our kitchen had been thrust into my bedroom door. Trembling with fear, I explained the situation to the two officers and directed them to Dorothy's room. She resisted being detained but was eventually taken away by the police. The following month, I moved to a different apartment, this time with fellow students from my university. To this day, I can't comprehend what drove Dorothy to act the way she did. My best guess is that she had a severe, untreated condition for which she wasn't taking medication. But then again, who knows? Perhaps she had genuine intentions to harm me in my sleep. Thankfully, due to my precautions, I never had to find out.